Welcome to Vision for Humanity Radio. This is Samuel D. Moore and Tim Williams. Tim Williams is our ordained pastor from the United Christian Faith Ministries. So tonight the topic is the electric universe and the Thunderbolts project, interpreting the cosmos. Now, if you're not familiar with the electric universe, then you should basically have a rudimentary understanding of how current cosmological theories go, and it's something like this. The cosmos are balanced by forces dictated by gravitational phenomena such as planetary bodies, comets, asteroids, nova, supernova, red dwarf stars, and all these physical entities that we can see. But since they can't make sense of how everything stays balanced so well in these perfect spiral galaxies, they have to make up other forms of gravitational fields such as dark matter, dark energy, and black holes. And I think they have a new one, strange matter. And then, of course, there's the cosmological constant, some ridiculously small number, something like 10 to the 29th decimal places it goes to, and if it's changed by even one of those decimal places, then the whole universe explodes or conversely collapses into a black hole. So this has mystified people for years, and nobody except a handful of scientists seems to understand how the math works. So there's a man named Wallace Thornhill who he wasn't the only person, wasn't the first person to come up with the idea that there were forces other than gravity acting in the universe, i.e. electromagnetic forces from currents, electric currents via plasma fluids. Air is a fluid, as is water and liquid mercury, and air can contain electric ions, positive and negatively charged ions, as well as neutrinos and little teeny subatomic particles and photons, of course, and gravitons, which is another made-up word to make sense of the force of gravity, which we don't understand. At any rate, it all basically started with this man named Kristian Olaf Bernhard Birkeland. He was born in December 13, 1867, died June 15, 1917. And in 1908, he went up to the North Pole and tried to measure the gravitational fields under the Aurora Borealis, the northern lights, those cool-looking lights that happen once in a while. And his theory was that there was some gravitational fluctuation in the gravitational field that was causing those lights. So he measured the gravitational field with magnets. And sure enough, as soon as the lights started showing up, like exactly when they started showing up, the compasses went berserk. You know, north turned to south and vice versa and spun around. So he concluded that there was some big, huge fluctuation in the electromagnetic fields, most likely caused by some cosmic rays that were emanating from the sun. But the current view at the time was that no, this was caused by pressure gradients causing changes in the airflow, which in turn changed the ionic nature of the air, and that's what caused the fluctuation in the magnetic field. So they poo-pooed him and gave him a bad name, and then 60 years later, in 1967, a satellite was launched into the Aurora region, and it showed, sure enough, that Birkeland currents are real. So they named the currents after him, Birkeland currents. So that was the beginning of this theory, basically, the electric universe theory. And then Professor Emeritus Alphavin of the Alphavin Laboratory in Sweden, his name is Carl Falthammer, he wrote, "A reason why Birkeland currents are particularly interesting is that in the plasma forced to carry them, they cause a number of plasma physical processes to occur. Waves, instabilities, fine structure formation. These, in turn, lead to consequences such as acceleration of charged particles, both positive and negative, and element separation, such as preferential ejection of oxygen ions. Both of these classes of phenomena should have a general astrophysical interest far beyond that of understanding the space environment of our own Earth. So he was saying that these forces don't just happen here on Earth. You know, they happen out there in outer space. But of course, the astrophysicists at the time didn't really know much about plasma discharge and electromagnetic forces, but they knew a lot about gravity because, you know, gravity obeys the inverse square law, where you take the mass of two objects, you add them together, and then divide by the square of the distance between them. Pretty simple, no time involved, which is another interesting phenomenon with gravity. It does not require any time for the Earth to know where the sun is, which is really bizarre. Nobody really understands, and partly because we haven't been paying attention to the most important factor in all this, which is electric currents. Okay, so then there was another guy named Emanuel Velikovsky. He was actually a psychiatrist, and he did psychoanalytics on people. And he was a Bible scholar as well. So astrophysicists basically snubbed their nose at him when he came up with theories that these forces, electromagnetic forces, and they called them Thunderbolts of the gods, electromagnetic discharges, were what caused planet formation. He said that back a long time ago, according to ancient mythology, Mars and Venus closely interacted with Earth, and they were basically a huge threat to humanity. And so that's why all these ancient peoples drew these crazy pictures of the planet Venus with this big serpent tail, and it was all scary, and it was going to kill them and wipe them out. And he said that actually it was probably electromagnetic discharges from Venus onto Mars that caused a lot of the comets and asteroids. And of course the mainstream astrophysicists said, no, these things are actually caused by coalescing particles, interstellar debris and dust that clump together and form big masses, which then acquire liquid water, which turns to ice, and it's the heating of this ice in the center of the comet that causes the tail. But then they noticed that these tails were occurring far off in outer space, way out where they shouldn't occur, where it's super cold. And they're like, well, we didn't understand that, but at any rate. So then this guy, William Thornhill, he started the Thunderbolts project. And he started posting online some of his theories of what would happen with some of these tests that like NASA and the Jet Propulsion Labs were doing. And there was one test in particular, there's a whole bunch of them, but one of them that struck me as super important was when they fired a 820-pound copper projectile at Comet Tempel 1. And just before the collision, William Thornhill postulated that it's not going to do what you think it's going to do. See, they thought it was just going to smash into the comet and cause a big dust cloud to form, and some water would squirt out, and they'd be able to collect the dust and water. And Thornhill said, no, what's going to happen is as it approaches the comet, all your sensors are going to go haywire, and they're going to short circuit, and then there's going to be a big flash from the electromagnetic interaction. And then when it finally does hit, it'll barely leave an impact scar. And sure enough, it happened exactly like he said it was going to happen. So they were all like, that was just a strange phenomenon we don't really understand. And Will Thornhill, who doesn't even have a PhD, he's like, but I told you it was going to happen that way. And this kind of thing happens over and over again. So if you do your own research, you can actually see that NASA's own data supports the electric universe hypothesis. And to me, it's pretty obviously the correct hypothesis. And these current astrophysicists and cosmologists are just grasping at straws trying to disprove these people because their livelihood depends on it. They got these big grants for billions of dollars to investigate black holes, dark matter, strange matter, and all this stuff. And if they agree that the electric universe people are right, then it shoots themselves in the foot, they slit their own throat, and they lose their jobs or their grants. Anyway, so that's the summary. Tim, what do you know about all this?
Scientifically, very little. It makes sense to me. We've argued about creation for years, and as a minister, I go with the Bible. God said, and it was created. We did past shows on the God particle and stuff they were doing with CERN. What was the other one you used? The string theory. That as we get the technology to find smaller and smaller particles, they keep finding out that they're energy, they're waves.
Right.
The discussions I kept seeing on the web was, is it solid or is it a wave? Well, energy at a certain form is solid, and of course, again, as a Christian and a firm Bible believer, it's a wave. It's, if you want to put it this way, that's the way I put it. It's God's voice. Right. It created everything, and of course, now the scientists that want to be right and stamp their feet like little children, and we know more than everybody, and that's what's funny. You go back through history, and doctors, scientists, we're right, we know more than anybody. I go back to when I was, a kid in school. In science, I had to draw a picture of the smallest living creature. It was an amoeba. And that's, this is what they were telling me, right? And they know everything, and it has a cell wall and a nucleus, and that's it. Well, now we know that's insane. The smallest creature they can find of that type, a paramecium, it has little cilia that move it around, and as they explore those are incredibly complex, get the term, electric motors. So small that it takes an electron microscope to even discover them, and they haven't even totally, got down into the workings of that, but they term it an electric motor.
Right, the flagellum. You're talking about a flagellated paramecium?
Yeah. So you've got more science than I am. I'm just a poor preacher with my hat out for a collection, and we can't even take a collection on the radio, so what do you do? Anyway, sorry about that. Right. But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
scientists don't want to change. They knew everything. I remember, this is it, and they presented, boy, this is all the secrets of the universe. And then 10 years later, oh, well, yeah, that's old stuff. Now it's over here. And it's a little bit like the Wizard of Oz. Pay no attention to the little man behind the curtain. This got brand new stuff. And as the new stuff comes out, just like you said about this gentleman that was presenting, or these people presenting this idea, they argue, and it's basically just like you said. They don't want to lose their tenure, their position. If you were Oriental, it's called losing face. But it just amazes me how people that call themselves scientists, the word science, when I look it up in the dictionary, it's the definition I read is a method of study. And their method of study is, this is right, my mind's made up, don't bother me with the facts. And that doesn't sound very scientific to me. A scientific study is one that you can prove and repeat numerous times under various circumstances. And I looked at the material you sent me. This guy had, and again, I don't have the science. I can follow the guy. It looks very good. He at least had some demonstrations and some models that you could at least examine his thinking. The rebuttals, I spent more time looking for rebuttals to his work, and all I heard was hyperbole, disgruntled whining and moaning, ranting and raving with no facts, and the only argument was, we don't like this.
It's typical of somebody who's threatened. If you're in a corner and you realize that they've got you no matter what you're going to do, you just scramble for anything you can possibly, you just start flailing. And so they're actually flailing. blah, blah, you scum, you're so stupid, you're stupid, stupid, stupid. They'll yell stupid a bunch of times, try to discredit him. But, Einstein himself was a, high school dropout. So basically, the founding father of the theory of relativity didn't go to college. He dropped out of high school. He was like he worked at a post office or something like that, and he's like, this school stuff's boring. I'm going to do my own thing. And that's often what happens with geniuses, is they get tired of the status quo and they go off and do their own thing. So just because he doesn't have some kind of PhD behind his name doesn't mean that he's not on the right track. And there have been many people on the right track, but they always get snubbed. And the other day I was talking about kind of like the electric car. When the electric car idea first came out, the petroleum industry was buying up patents and just squishing the idea, and finally it kind of came through as a hybrid. It's like, okay, well, if you're going to do this, you got to use some oil, you can't just do it without oil. And then I guess, who's that one company that makes the really fancy electric cars that go super fast? Anyway, I guess they had a hard time. They were having battles getting their cars sold in certain places, and a lot of it's political. And that's what these guys are saying. It's like, you're not just going to come across battles of intellectual, prowess. You're not going to just have to deal with the intellectual battles with people as far as my hypothesis is right because of these scientific facts and this scientific data, but you're going to have to deal with people's vitriolic responses based on their livelihoods are at stake and their religious beliefs and all this and that. And so, and I can kind of relate, because when people try to tell me there is no God, it's all I can do to not get a little bit emotional about it and just say, how can you be so stupid? Look up at the stars and the miracles that are all around you. The fact that bees can see the patterns in flowers that we can't, that helps them pollinate the earth. And the spiral galaxies have the same shape as a snail shell, which has the same shape as the sunflower seeds on a sunflower. And I mean, God's signatures on everything, that whole Fibonacci series thing, the golden ratio or golden mean. And, to me, it's so obvious that there is a God that when people try to tell me there is no God, it kind of almost pisses me off. It's like, how can you be so stupid? And I feel like name calling, but I try not to. I mean, I don't, I just try to explain to them, well, in my opinion, it makes more sense to believe in a creator than if you're a scientist who believes in the theory of entropy, to believe that all this came about as a result of random bonking into each other of inorganic debris in a big, huge system in which there's no order. How can there be so much order in a universe where the second law of thermodynamics, the law of entropy, is that everything is in a constant state of increasing disorderliness? So it makes no sense. Their own scientific dogma refutes the possibility that this could be an accident.
Right. How can chaos create order? And, they argue against intelligent design. But, that's man's nature. I want to be the smartest. I want to be the biggest. I want to be the toughest. And we fight against that. That's the fallen nature of man. What are you going to do?
I don't know. Not much. One of the best quotes I came up with when researching this topic was by Victor Hugo. And he said, nothing is more powerful than an idea whose time has come. And that's how I feel about this concept. To me, it doesn't matter how much they try to fight it, because it's so plainly obvious to me that there is some truth to it, certainly more than made-up theories on black holes, dark matter, dark energy, strange matter, and cosmological constants, and things that you just can't reproduce in the lab. And that's another thing. With with, for example, Mars. Mars is split in two hemispheres. The one hemisphere has craters and valleys and ditches, and the other hemisphere has mountains and ridges. And when they take a solid object, such as a piece of clay or something, in a lab, and they polarize it so that one side is positively charged, and they zap that side with a plasma discharge, such as an arc welder or something like that, it creates ridges if it's positively charged. And they do the same thing to the negatively charged hemisphere of that same ball, and they get craters and valleys identical to those you see on Mars. So, and same thing with comets. When they blast inanimate objects that are either neutrally charged or not very electronically active with intense plasma discharges, they get particles that look identical to the, it's this bilobal shape, kind of like an infinity sign, but in 3 dimensions, and where one side is slightly bigger than the other. These comets all have this weird shape. They have like 2 lobes, and that's the same shape of object you get when you zap particles with plasma discharges like an arc welder. And so the cool thing about this theory is that you can actually go into a lab and reproduce what God has done in outer space in your own lab. Whereas, the current theories of astrophysics with black holes, they're over there with the CERN Large Hadron Collider trying to create a black hole. Well, they're trying not to create a black hole. They're trying to discover the God particle, a.k.a. the Higgs boson. I don't know if you know what the Higgs boson is, but the Higgs field is a field which gives subatomic particles their mass. So what they determined was when they subdivided an atom into proton, neutron, electron, and then they subdivided those particles into littler particles like leptons and quarks and up and down particles with spin and all this stuff, none of those little subatomic particles had mass. So they said, well, there's got to be something that gives them mass. So they had to come up with a theory of something that gives them mass. So they spent $13 billion to discover this field. They call it the Higgs field, or the Higgs boson, which is supposedly gives all other subatomic particles mass. And they still haven't come up with a theory of everything. They still cannot converge mechanics with quantum mechanics. Like common day, everyday stuff, like a car driving down the road, cannot appear in 2 places at the same time. But a subatomic particle can. Not only can it, but it does. And it's like, well, how does that work? I don't know. Let's keep searching for more mythical particles and fairies, under rocks in the garden. Anyway, so, yeah, they're just kind of, what's the name? Will what did I say his last name was? Hills, Thornhill, William Thornhill. He puts it like this. Back when Einstein discovered the theory of relativity, and even before that, when Newton discovered the law of gravity, even Newton admitted that he didn't even understand gravity. He just knew that it acted independent of time and that somehow it works. His equation was amazing and it works, and he didn't understand why. And then when Einstein came up with the theory of relativity, it was really impressive mathematically, but it didn't make sense of anything. So they took a wrong turn anyway because it was such an amazing theory and the math was so cool. They started going down that rabbit trail, and they've been going down it ever since. And it's never going to lead anywhere other than to more mathematical equations that don't solve any real problems. And it's just, you have to be one of the handful of genius mathematicians to understand how any of it theoretically works. And theoretical is the buzzword there because nothing actually applies to the real world. It's all theoretical. So that's the gist of it. Oh, I had 2 more things. I wanted to make a Bible quote from Luke. I think this relates to the time we're in right now. It's Luke chapter 8, verse 16, 17 says, "No man, when he hath lighted a candle, covereth it with a vessel, or put it under a bed, but setteth it on a candlestick, that they which enter may see the light. For nothing is secret that shall not be made manifest, neither anything hid that should not be known and come abroad. So everything is going to come to light, and that's what we're seeing. Another one in Daniel chapter 12, verse 1 through 4, it says, And at that time shall Michael stand up, Prince, which standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was never a nation even to that same time. And at that same time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn to many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. So the very last sentence there, knowledge shall be increased. That's one of the hallmarks of end time. And I think that's right where we are.
I like to see people thinking about creation. It is sad to me when I see them thinking of creation as just a physical thing, and that they could actually figure it out. That's man exalting himself. I know there was a particular church I was with many years ago, and a very dry denomination that, again, they put more stock in their knowledge, and that kind of goes with the scripture you read earlier, knowledge will increase. Well, what does man's knowledge really do? They would tell you, our science has made your life better. Great. I can sit around on an iPhone and look up things on eBay. You know what I mean? They say medicine is better, but they argue. And have you ever watched a commercial for medicine on TV, and then after they tell you how wonderful it is, the fast-talking guy comes on, and it'll tell you that your lips may fall off and your eyeballs will swell up and fall out, and all those weird things that it does. And again, like I said earlier, you go back in time, and scientists and doctors, we have the cure. This is it. In fact, I watched a show the other day, and it was kind of in the 1800s, and the doctor was injecting mercury into a cut to stop infection. I'm thinking, my God, that will kill you. You know what I mean? Mercury's poisonous to it. And looking to discover the universe and ignoring the Creator is just foolishness. But, that's what the Bible says. It says the knowledge of the cross, the knowledge of God is foolish to those that are perishing. So it kind of makes me sad. But as far as the electric part of the universe, like I said earlier, I would tend to agree with that discovery. Again, God will show himself over time. And as we get closer to the end, he is. And I think you kind of touched on this earlier. He shows his creativity. And as we look at the electric nature of the universe, to me it relates to that wave theory, that his voice is the energy that sustains everything. The Bible says that nothing was created that wasn't created by him, and it's upheld by him. It's upheld by his thought, his nature, and the power of his creative voice and spirit.
Right.
And again, one other thought that I had earlier when I was speaking, scientists arguing, and you mentioned this, that they don't want to lose their place. If we drop this theory, all these papers that I've written for the last 30 years will prove false, and I'll look goofy. The Jewish leaders, when Christ, I think it's in the latter chapters of John, I think it was either just right after he resurrected Lazarus or healed the guy that they dropped down through the ceiling. And so the leaders were talking. They said, you know what, this Jesus is attracting such a crowd. If we allow him to continue, we will lose our possessions and our place. And that says it all right there. If we allow somebody to actually think of something new and creative and good, we're going to lose all our stuff.
Yeah, they weren't denying that he was divine or from God. They were like, this is a threat to our livelihood here. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the same thing with the people who were designing the idols or the temples and stuff. And they were like, there's this new dude that's saying this is wrong, and this is our livelihood. You know, we make these idols that you're worshiping, and so if we quit putting idols on temples, then we have no job. So let's rise up against this guy.
Right. Paul even mentioned that. He said, I forget the guy's name, he said a particular silversmith has caused me no end of grief. And that was why, because he was a silversmith. He made idols.
Right.
It's the same old story. One of the things that I saw in your guy's video, and you mentioned CERN, a lot of his work was proved out at CERN. He used some of their work to prove or to demonstrate, not prove, but demonstrate his theory. So
right.
He's using one source to argue against the same source, you know.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that kind of reminds me of that one Bible verse that says that God uses the simple things to confound the wise, because they think of him as a simpleton. It's like, no, you're wrong because you don't understand all this crazy math we're doing here. And he's like, well, actually, that crazy math doesn't matter because it's this simple, you know? And they're like, no, it's black holes, dark matter, and dark energy, and strange matter, and strange action at a distance, and superposition, and so what do they call it? Symmetry, supersymmetry, and just they make up all this hypothetical stuff. And, you know, granted, maybe it is true on some 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th dimension or whatever mathematically, or who knows, maybe in some other dimension. But does it really apply to the universe we live in? You know, maybe it applies to some other realm, in the spiritual realm, and maybe that's what they're up to. I don't know. You know, I think that's what they are up to with that CERN, is actually opening up a gate to another dimension. In fact, they even said that. They said, we actually expect to send something through into another dimension, or possibly bring something from another dimension into this dimension. So they're actually, I think, what is it, Revelations 9 about Apollos in the abyss? I think they're actually opening up that abyss. Well, you were talking about the flagellum. That I listened to a long debate on intelligent design versus evolution, and that was one of the arguments they used, was that the flagellar motor has this principle of irreducible complexity. In other words, any single part of that flagellar motor has no use for anything other than being a part of the flagellar motor. In other words, it couldn't have none of those individual parts could have evolved on their own, because they have no other function. So in order for that to come into being, it had to come into being in one fell swoop, accidentally, according to the evolutionary biologist. And in order for that to happen, it had to have something like 30 different genes and billions of sequentially placed in the exact same order nucleic acids and mRNA strands and proteins, and just this astronomically low probability that could ever happen, even in an infinite number of universes in this, the multiverse hypothesis. That the multiverse hypothesis is that the way evolution happened was that there are infinite number of universes in which random entropy rules, and possibly that there are other rules other than the physics we understand in this universe. And with all those infinite number of possibilities, life was bound to happen accidentally. That's
right.
They just say, it's like you've heard the saying that if you get enough monkeys in a room typing on typewriters, they'll eventually come up with Hamlet or Shakespeare,
right?
Or
all the great books, right?
The British Dictionary. You know, enough monkeys will eventually do it. It's like, that's just BS. I mean, it's ludicrous. That's like when Stephen Hawking said, because there exists a law of gravity, the universe can and will form itself out of nothing. And it's like, okay, so this guy's supposedly a genius, but anybody with a grain of common sense can see that that's complete, utter garbage. You can't get something out of nothing.
That's garbage because the law of gravity is the attraction of mass, and mass is not nothing.
Right. The only reason you have a law of gravity is to explain something. So it's like, that's just ludicrous. And, you know, that Stephen Hawking, I think he may be some made-up Illuminati kind of MK Ultra experiment. Because how can you really write all those books with all you can do is move your eyes and have somebody interpret what you're trying to say? It's like, I don't think so. There's something fishy about that.
Stephen Hawking is angry because, as I understand it, I mean, he wasn't crippled by an accident or birth. He was crippled by a disease, and he's mad. He's angry. And it must be God's fault. I hate you. How could you let this happen to me? And instead of going to the Creator and ask him that, you just scream at it and accuse and say, I hate you. I feel sorry for him. Because
there's some dude out there that claims that Stephen Hawking has a group of writers work with physicists to write all this garbage up, and it's not really him saying it. It's a bunch of people. It's like this make-believe. Kind of like the Wizard of Oz wasn't actually the Wizard of Oz. It was some dude behind the curtain. And that Stephen Hawking is just kind of the face on the, the
that's kind of the way I look at it. You know, my favorite psalm is 131, and it said, Lord, my heart is not proud, and my mind is not set on things far beyond me. You know, and I'm happy living my life. And some would say, oh, you're just happy with ignorance. No, it's not ignorance, because I do know the Creator of this universe, and He brings me great peace and joy. And I think we're just about out of time.
Yep. Amen on that one.